was just an old man getting coffee, a ghost from a forgotten war. In the peaceful town of Oak Haven, an 88-year-old veteran named Arthur Peterson was about to teach a violent biker gang a lesson they'd never forget. Arthur, known as Doc, to those who remembered his service, seemed like a quiet old man until the day the notorious Iron Scorpions made the mistake of harassing him at his local cafe. What the gang didn't know was that this calm veteran was a living legend, the Angel of Firebase Condor, who had saved more than 200 men's lives during the Vietnam War. When the intimidation crossed the line, Arthur made one phone call that would change everything. Before we dive in, if you like this kind of stories of overcoming adversity and justice, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. The morning air in Oak Haven was cool and sweet with the smell of dew on fresh-cut grass. Arthur Peterson, known to the few who remembered as Doc, guided his old but reliable Chevrolet sedan into a parking spot in front of the Corner Perk Cafe. At 88, his movements were slow but deliberate. His back was straight, a testament to a discipline learned half a world away, a lifetime ago. His silver hair was neatly combed. His hands, though wrinkled with age, were steady on the wheel. He wore a simple flannel shirt, clean work pants, and a faded green hat. Embroidered on the hat were 3 simple words: Vietnam Veteran. For Arthur, it wasn't a boast. It was a quiet memorial for the men who never came home. "Morning, Mr. Peterson," called Sarah, the young woman behind the counter. She was a student at the local college, always ready with a bright smile. "Sarah." Arthur nodded, his own smile small but genuine. "The usual, please." He settled into his regular booth by the window. It gave him a clear view of the town square. He liked to watch the town wake up. Mothers walking their children to school. Shop owners sweeping their sidewalks. It was a peaceful life. A life he had fought for, long ago. The familiar scent of coffee and toasted bagels filled the air. Arthur's mind drifted. He thought of the weekly chess game he had later with his friend, Tom. He thought about the letter he needed to write to his granddaughter. These small routines were the anchors of his quiet world. A world he had carefully built over the ashes of his past. The peace was shattered by a deep, angry rumble. The sound grew louder, more aggressive, until it felt like thunder shaking the cafe's windows. One motorcycle, then 5, then a dozen, rolled into the town square. They were chrome and black leather, symbols of intimidation. The Iron Scorpions had arrived. Arthur's hand remained steady on his coffee mug. His military training, buried but never gone, surfaced automatically. Assess the situation. Stay aware. Remain calm. The leader dismounted. He was a big man with a thick beard and cold eyes. His leather vest was covered in patches that spoke of violence. They called him Razor. He moved with a practiced swagger, an arrogance that demanded attention. Well, look what we have here." Razor's voice boomed as he and his men entered the cafe. The few other customers tensed. Sarah's smile vanished. Razor's eyes swept the room. They landed on Arthur, sitting alone in his booth. His gaze fixed on the faded green hat. "Grandpa's out for his morning coffee," Razor sneered. Snickers rippled through his gang. Arthur took a slow sip of his coffee. His expression was neutral. He had faced down men who would make this gang look like choir boys. The real danger, he had learned in the jungle, rarely made so much noise. "Just enjoying the morning," Arthur replied. His voice was even and calm. "No need for trouble here." One of the bikers, a tall, thin man with a snake tattoo on his neck, sauntered closer. His eyes narrowed on Arthur's hat. "Hey, Razor. Check it out," the man said. "Vietnam veteran. You hear that? The old man thinks he's a hero." Razor's laughter was ugly. "A hero? What did you do over there, old-timer?" "Peel potatoes for the real soldiers." The words were meant to sting. They poked at old wounds Arthur kept carefully hidden. But his face remained a calm mask. They couldn't know about the nights spent in muddy trenches, the sound of bullets whistling past his head. They couldn't know about the lives he had held in his hands. The ones he saved and the ones he couldn't. "I served my country," Arthur said simply. He placed his mug back on the saucer. The clink was the only sharp sound in the quiet diner. Razor stepped closer. His boots scraped the floor. "Served your country? Let me tell you about this country, old man. The only thing you served is your time. Now, this town belongs to us. The Iron Scorpions." The other bikers spread out. They formed a loose, threatening circle. Sarah had backed away from the counter, her face pale. She was reaching for the phone hidden below the counter. Arthur knew she was calling the police. He also knew they wouldn't arrive in time to make a difference. "You should move along." Razor's voice dropped to a growl. "This isn't your town anymore." Arthur straightened his back. It was a small movement, but it held great weight. His eyes, clear and blue, met Razor's without a flicker of fear. "Young man," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I've seen real monsters. You and your friends are just boys playing dress-up. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a chess game to get to." He moved to slide out of the booth. One of the bikers slammed a hand on the table, blocking his path. The sound was like a gunshot in the tense room. Arthur's heart rate did not change. He had heard real gunshots. He had felt the ground shake from real explosions. "Maybe you didn't hear me." Razor leaned in. His breath smelled of stale coffee and cigarettes. "In our town, you show respect." Arthur's voice remained steady. "Respect is earned, son. And all I see here are bullies who prey on women and old men. You haven't earned a thing." The words hung in the air. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the coffee machine. Then Razor's face twisted into a dangerous sneer. His hand shot out. He grabbed Arthur's arm. His fingers dug in with bruising force. "You want to learn about respect?" he snarled. "We'll teach you all about respect." As Razor's fingers tightened, Arthur's mind flashed back. It was a memory from a lifetime ago, a night of fire and rain in a place called Firebase Condor. He was pulling a young captain from the burning wreckage of a command post. That captain had lost a lot of blood, but he was a fighter. He grew up to become General Marcus Thorne, the same Marcus Thorne who now led the largest veteran motorcycle club in the state, the Sentinel Guard. Arthur remembered the general's words, spoken years later at a reunion. "Doc, you ever need anything at all, you call me." He had never made that call. In all these years, he had never needed to. But as he looked into Razor's cruel eyes, he knew that was about to change. The Iron Scorpions had no idea what they had just started. They were about to learn a lesson about real strength, real courage, and real respect. And it would begin with a single phone call. Razor's grip on Arthur's arm tightened. His gang moved closer, a wall of black leather and menace. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cafe floor. It was a scene of pure intimidation. But Arthur Peterson hadn't survived the siege of Firebase Condor by giving in to bullies. "Take your hand off me," he said. His voice was low, but it carried the same tone he had once used to command medics under fire. Now, something in that voice made Razor hesitate. For just a second, his fingers loosened. But his sneer remained. "Or what, Grandpa? You gonna write a stern letter to the editor?" "I don't make threats," Arthur replied. He carefully pulled his arm free from the loosened grip. "I never have. But I promise you, son, you are making a terrible mistake." The biker with the snake tattoo laughed. "Hear that, Razor? The old man's making promises." Arthur used their moment of amusement to slide out of the booth. His movements were calm and controlled. Through the window, he could see Sarah in the back, still on the phone, her face tight with worry. He knew the local police were good people, but they were outmanned. The Iron Scorpions had been a growing problem in Oakhaven for months. "You're not going anywhere," Razor declared. He stepped in front of Arthur, blocking the door. "Not until you learn some manners." "Manners?" Arthur started his slow walk toward the door. "Let me tell you something about manners. I learned mine treating wounded men while bombs fell around my head. What have you done, besides scare honest people?" His words hit a nerve. Razor's face darkened. He signaled to his gang. They moved, blocking the exit completely. "Get back in the booth," Razor demanded. Now, instead of complying, Arthur reached into his pocket. He pulled out an old, simple flip phone. The action made several bikers tense. They thought he was calling the police. But Arthur wasn't calling the local authorities. Not yet. "You want to see what real respect looks like?" he asked, his thumb hovering over the keypad. "Just wait." Razor laughed. The sound was harsh in the small cafe. "Oh, I get it. You're calling for backup. Maybe your knitting club? Go ahead. Call whoever you want. We'll still be here." Arthur's mind flashed back again. A memory, so clear it was like yesterday. Rain coming down in sheets. Visibility was almost zero. But he heard the call for a medic. A young captain was pinned down, bleeding out. His name was Marcus Thorne. Everyone said it was a suicide run to get to him. But Arthur went anyway. He had crawled through mud and fire, using nothing but instinct and grit. And he had pulled him out alive. "You boys ever hear of the Sentinel Guard?" he asked. His finger pressed the first number. Several of the bikers shifted. The Sentinel Guard was a legend in certain circles. A motorcycle club made up entirely of combat veterans. They were led by the formidable General Thorne. They weren't just bikers. They were organized. They were disciplined. They commanded respect from everyone, even the most violent outlaw gangs. What's that got to do with anything? Snake Tattoo asked, but there was a new uncertainty in his voice. Everything, Arthur replied, continuing to dial. You see, back in the day, there was this young captain. His unit was overrun deep in enemy territory. Everyone said it was a lost cause to go in after him, but I went anyway. The phone began to ring on the other end. Razor's expression flickered. Anger fought with confusion. That captain, Arthur continued, his voice clear and strong. His name was Marcus Thorne. These days, people call him the General. The phone connected. A deep, gravelly voice answered. Thorne. General, it's Doc Peterson. Remember that night at Firebase Condor? There was a short pause. Then General Thorne's voice softened with recognition. Doc? Of course, I remember. I'd be dead if it wasn't for you. What's wrong? You sound calm. Arthur's eyes locked with Razor's. I've got some young men here who need a lesson in respect. The Iron Scorpions. They seem to think Oakhaven belongs to them now. The change in Thorne's voice was instant. It turned to cold steel. Where are you? The Corner Perk Cafe. Take your time coming over. These boys aren't going anywhere. He ended the call. The atmosphere in the cafe had changed. Several of the bikers were looking at each other. They were nervous. The Iron Scorpions might rule Oakhaven through fear. But the Sentinel Guard was a different kind of power. Razor tried to keep his composure. But Arthur could see the doubt in his eyes. You're bluffing. A general isn't going to come running just because some old man calls him. Are you sure about that? Arthur asked. A small smile touched his lips. Want to stick around and find out? In the distance, a new sound began to build. It wasn't the chaotic roar of the Iron Scorpion's bikes. This was different. This was the synchronized, disciplined rumble of a military unit on the move. Razor's face went pale as the sound grew louder. Mount up, he barked to his gang. He was trying to keep control. We're not done here, old man. Not by a long shot. The Iron Scorpions scrambled out of the cafe. Their engines roared to life as they peeled out of the town square. Razor pointed a shaking finger at Arthur. This isn't over. You just made things 100 times worse for yourself. Arthur watched them go. His expression was calm. He knew they would be back. Bullies always came back. But now, the rules of the game had changed. As the sound of the Sentinel Guard grew closer, he allowed himself a small, satisfied sigh. The Iron Scorpions were about to learn what real strength looked like. The lesson was just beginning. The morning sun had climbed higher, burning away the morning mist. In its light, Arthur could see the first bikes of the Sentinel Guard appearing on the horizon. Their chrome gleamed like the armor of a modern cavalry. The real story was just about to begin. The Sentinel Guard arrived not like a storm, but like a tide. Their bikes moved in perfect, disciplined formation. They poured into the town square. 50 riders, then 75, then 100. Each one was a combat veteran. Their leather vests were adorned with military patches and the insignia of the units they had served with. At their head rode General Marcus Thorne. His hair was silver, his face was etched with the lines of time and command. His presence demanded respect without a single word. Sarah, the waitress, watched from the cafe door, her eyes wide. The other townspeople who had hidden in their shops now peeked out. These were not the chaotic, loud bikers they were used to. These men moved with a purpose. Their bikes arranged themselves in a defensive semicircle around the town square. It was a military formation. General Thorne dismounted. He removed his helmet, revealing a stern face that broke into a warm smile when his eyes found Arthur. Doc, he said. His voice carried the weight of a shared, difficult past. Been a long time. Too long, General, Arthur replied. He stood a little straighter. Old habits die hard. I wish the reunion was under better circumstances. Thorne's smile vanished. He glanced in the direction the Iron Scorpions had fled. Tell me everything. As Arthur recounted the morning's events, more of the veterans gathered. They listened in silence. Their faces grew dark with each detail. These were men who understood respect. They had earned it in jungles, in deserts, and on mountainsides. They had earned it by watching their brothers fight and fall beside them. The Iron Scorpions, one of the veterans spat. They've been a plague on this whole county. It's time someone taught them a lesson. Thorne raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. He looked at Arthur. Doc here taught me a lesson back at Firebase Condor. Do you remember what you told me that night, Doc? When everyone said we were done for. Arthur smiled faintly. I told you that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right when you are afraid. That's right. Thorne nodded. And you showed us what that meant. You ran through enemy fire like you were walking through a park. You saved my life and the lives of a dozen other men. One of the younger veterans stepped forward. His eyes were wide with awe. Wait a minute. You're Doc Peterson, the angel of Firebase Condor, the medic who held the west flank by himself for 3 hours. The one and only, Thorne confirmed, though he never did like that nickname. Arthur waved it away. There were plenty of heroes that day. I just did my job. Just did his job, Thorne echoed, with a short laugh. He says it like it was nothing. Boys, this man is a living legend. And now some two-bit gang thinks they can push him around? Intimidate him in his own town. The faces of the veterans hardened. A silent resolve passed through the ranks. These men understood loyalty. They understood debt. The Iron Scorpions had threatened more than an old man. They had threatened one of their own. A brother. They will be back, Arthur said. His voice was steady. They're not the type to let this go. Let them come, Thorne replied. His tone was grim. First, we need to know what we're up against. Tell me about their leader. This Razor. As Arthur described the man, Thorne's expression grew more serious. He knew the type. A bully who had never faced real opposition. A man who confused fear with respect. The police chief, a Marine veteran named Roberts, arrived. He took one look at the assembled Sentinel Guard and nodded slowly. Looks like the cavalry has arrived. He walked over to Thorne and Arthur. They've been terrorizing Oakhaven for months. We just don't have the manpower to deal with them head-on. Thorne nodded. A plan was forming in his mind. He turned to Arthur. You have that chess game to get to, don't you, Doc? Yes, but under the circumstances. You'll go. Thorne cut him off gently. You'll go to your chess game. You'll go about your day, just like any other day. But you won't be going alone. He turned to his men. His voice took on the commanding tone that had led them through battle. First platoon, you're on escort duty with document. Second and third, you'll start patrols. I want eyes on every street in this town. The Iron Scorpions want to play games. Let's show them how veterans do business. The men moved with practiced efficiency. They broke into their assigned groups. Thorne turned back to Arthur. We'll handle this, document. The old way. Arthur looked at the assembled veterans. These men understood sacrifice and honor in a way the Iron Scorpions never could. Just try not to tear up the town, Marcus. Oakhaven has been my home for 50 years. No promises, Thorne grinned. But his eyes were serious. But those boys need to learn that respect isn't taken. It's earned. And they're about to get a serious education. The Sentinel Guard mounted their bikes. Their engines roared to life in a single, unified sound. It was the sound of controlled power. Arthur got into his old Chevrolet. The veterans formed up around him. An honor guard of chrome and steel. The convoy pulled out of the town square. It was a display of discipline and strength that silenced the entire town. In its wake, Sarah stood in the doorway of the cafe, a smile finally returning to her face. Something was changing in Oakhaven. For the first time in a long time, it felt like hope. Across town, in a dusty, abandoned warehouse that served as the Iron Scorpions clubhouse, Razor paced like a caged animal. The oil-stained concrete floor echoed his angry footsteps. His gang watched him. They were nervous. The morning's encounter had shaken their confidence. The Sentinel Guard, Razor spat. He kicked an empty beer can, sending it clattering across the floor. Of all the people in this worthless town, that old man had to know General Thorne. Snake Tattoo leaned against his bike. He tried to sound tough. So what? They're just another motorcycle club. We've handled rival clubs before. An older member, a man they called Grinder, shook his head. No, these guys are different. They're not just bikers. They're combat vets. They're organized. Disciplined. They've seen real war. We've seen plenty of action, Razor growled. But there was a new uncertainty in his voice. Not like them, Grinder insisted. I've heard stories about Thorne. He runs that club like it's still his old army unit. And that old man, if he's really who they say he is. I don't care if he's the president himself. Razor exploded. He slammed his fist into a dented metal locker. This is our town. We can't let some old man and his fossil friends push us around. We'll lose everything we've built. Meanwhile, Arthur's convoy arrived at the Oakhaven Community Center. He was meeting his friend Tom for their weekly chess game. The Sentinel Guards' bikes formed a quiet, watchful perimeter around the parking lot. As Arthur stepped out of his car, several other seniors who had been waiting for their own activities came out to greet him. Their eyes were wide at the sight of his escort. "Quite an entrance, Arthur," smiled Eleanor Vance, who ran the town's historical society. "I hear you've had an eventful morning." "Word travels fast in a small town," Arthur observed, straightening his hat. "It's hard to miss 100 veterans on motorcycles rolling through town," Eleanor replied. "Want to tell us what happened?" Inside, as Arthur and Tom set up their chessboard, the story was shared. The room was filled with veterans of different ages, from World War II to the Gulf War. Their reactions were a mix of anger and grim satisfaction. They knew what it was like to be underestimated. "I remembered something this morning," Arthur said, placing his king on the board. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the room. "Something from my last tour. We were evacuating a village. The enemy was closing in fast. We were taking heavy fire. The helicopter was getting shot to pieces. The room was silent. Everyone leaned in to listen. One of the young soldiers asked me later why I went back for a family that had gotten separated. Everyone else said it was too risky. I told him something I've never forgotten. Sometimes, the most important thing you can do is stand up for someone who can't stand up for themselves. It's not about being the strongest. It's about lending your strength to others." General Thorne, who had followed Arthur inside, stood at the back of the room. He nodded slowly. "That's what we're doing now, document. We're lending our strength to Oakhaven." The day passed with an unfamiliar sense of peace. Sentinel Guard members were a quiet presence throughout the town. They bought coffee at the cafe. They filled up their tanks at the local gas station. They stood watch, their disciplined presence a stark contrast to the chaos of the Iron Scorpions. Late in the afternoon, Razor and his gang decided to test them. They rumbled down Main Street, heading toward the hardware store owned by Tom, Arthur's chess partner. Tom was a Korean War veteran, and he had been paying protection money to the Scorpions for months. As they pulled up, 2 Sentinel Guard members stepped out of the store. They stood on the sidewalk, their arms crossed. They didn't say a word. They just stood there. A calm, immovable wall. Razor dismounted, trying to regain his swagger. "We're here to see Tom. It's business." One of the veterans, a former Marine sergeant, looked at him. His eyes were like ice. "Tom's busy, and he's no longer in need of your services." "Is that right?" Razor snarled. "Why don't we ask him ourselves?" Just then, Tom came out of his store. He stood a little taller than he had in years. Behind him, more veterans appeared from inside the store. A solid line of support. "You heard him, Razor." Tom's voice was steady. "We don't need your kind of protection anymore. We've got real protection now." Razor's hand twitched. He looked at the veterans in front of him. He looked at the others positioned across the street. He was outnumbered and outmatched. They hadn't drawn any weapons. They hadn't made any threats. They simply stood there. Their presence was a clear and undeniable message. "This isn't over, old man," Razor spat at Tom. His eyes scanned the street, finally finding Arthur, who was watching from the community center's porch. Razor's face twisted with a new kind of hatred. A deep, personal humiliation. "You did this," he shouted, pointing at Arthur. "You think you can just waltz in and turn my own town against me?" Arthur stood up and walked slowly to the edge of the porch. Every eye on the street was on him. "What exactly did you build here, son?" Arthur's voice was calm, but it carried to every corner of the street. "Fear? Intimidation? That's not building something. That's tearing it down." Other business owners had come out of their shops. They stood watching, no longer afraid. The Iron Scorpions shifted on their bikes. They were surrounded by a quiet, disciplined force in a town that was no longer cowering. "You don't understand anything." Razor's voice shook with rage. "This town was nothing before we came. We gave it an edge." "No," Arthur replied, taking a step forward. "You made it afraid. There's a difference." He gestured to the veterans around him. "These men, they know what real strength is. They fought in real wars, not against shopkeepers and teenagers. They understand something you never will. Respect isn't taken by force. It's earned by your actions." Razor's face was a mask of fury. He took a step toward the porch, but immediately found his path blocked by General Thorne and 3 other veterans. "Think very carefully about your next move, son," Thorne's voice was low, but it had an edge of pure steel. Very carefully. For a long moment, the air crackled with tension. Then, Razor backed away. His movements were jerky, filled with anger he couldn't release. "This is our town," he snarled, climbing onto his bike. "You want a war? You've got one." The iron scorpions roared away, leaving behind a cloud of exhaust and empty threats. As their sound faded, the street was silent for a moment. Then, someone began to clap. Tom, the hardware store owner. Others joined in. The sound grew as the townspeople of Oakhaven emerged from their shops, their faces filled with relief and gratitude. Tom approached Arthur, his eyes wet with tears. "Thank you," he said simply. "We've been waiting for someone to stand up to them. We were just afraid." "You don't have to be afraid anymore," Arthur assured him. "But this isn't over. That young man is hurt. His pride is hurt. He'll be back, and he'll be looking for revenge." General Thorne joined them. His expression was serious. "We won the first battle. But you're right, document. This is just the beginning. He'll hit back. And he'll hit back hard. Let him try," Arthur replied, watching the gathering crowd of townspeople. "Every move he makes now just shows Oakhaven who he really is. And who we really are." The sun had begun to set, washing the street in a warm, golden light. The shadow of fear that had hung over Oakhaven for so long was finally lifting. But everyone knew the real storm was still on its way. Razor and his gang would not go quietly. But looking at the faces around him, at veterans standing tall and townspeople finding their courage, Arthur knew they had already won something important. They had given Oakhaven back its soul. Now, they just had to keep it. Night fell over Oakhaven like a dark blanket. It brought with it a tense, uneasy quiet. The Sentinel Guard maintained their patrols, their bikes moving like silent ghosts through the darkened streets. In the 2 days since the confrontation on Main Street, the tension had been building. Arthur sat in his living room. He was reviewing a map of the town with General Thorne and Chief Roberts. Sarah from the cafe, a volunteer at heart, had set up a makeshift command center in Arthur's kitchen. She managed communications, her calm voice a steady presence over the radio network. Movement at the warehouse. Sarah's voice crackled over the radio. Large group heading out. At least 30 bikes. Thorne's response was immediate. "All units, maintain positions. Let's see what their plan is." Arthur moved to his window. He drew the curtain back, just a fraction. 2 Sentinel Guard members were parked across the street, their bikes dark and silent. He knew there were more nearby, hidden in the shadows, watching over him. The quiet was shattered by the sound of breaking glass, followed by a shout over the radio. "Fire at Tom's Hardware." Multiple attackers, moving fast. Before anyone could react, another report came in. "Molotov cocktail at the Corner Perk Cafe. They're hitting multiple targets at once." Thorne's voice remained steady and calm. "All units, converge on downtown. Protection teams, stay with your assigned locations. This is what we planned for." Arthur was already moving, grabbing his car keys. Sarah stepped in his path, shaking her head. "You can't, Arthur. You're their main target. You need to stay here where it's safe." "Those are my friends out there, Sarah," Arthur replied, his voice firm. "I started this. I will not hide while they suffer because of me." The radio crackled again. "They're targeting veteran-owned businesses. Miller's Auto Body is on fire." Sarah and Arthur shared a look. This wasn't random. This was a message. Outside, the night sky was glowing orange from the fires. The sound of sirens now mixed with the roar of motorcycles. Police and Sentinel Guard were responding, but the iron scorpions were moving fast, striking and then vanishing into the darkness. "Let me through," Arthur said to his security detail. This time, they didn't argue. They rushed to his car. Downtown Oakhaven had become a scene of chaos. The iron scorpions had struck in a coordinated attack, hitting the businesses that had dared to defy them. Fire trucks were already at the hardware store. Tom Mason stood on the sidewalk, watching his family's legacy burn. His face was a mask of grief. "They knew exactly where our patrols were," Thorne said as Arthur walked up. He had been coordinating the response. "They had to have inside information. Their source in the town government." Arthur nodded grimly. "They're trying to show the town that we can't protect them. They're trying to bring back the fear." Nearby, the Corner Perk Cafe had suffered less damage. A Sentinel Guard team had been inside and had put out the fire quickly. Sarah was there, helping direct the firefighters, her face smudged with soot, but her eyes blazing with defiance. A motorcycle roared past. Its rider laughed as he threw another firebomb. Before it could hit its target, a Sentinel Guard rider intercepted it, knocking the bottle into the empty street where it shattered harmlessly. "This is just the beginning," Thorn warned. The flames reflected in his eyes. "Razor is showing us what he's willing to do. The next time will be worse." As if to prove his point, a new, panicked voice came over their radios. "They're at the VFW hall. They're trying to burn it down." Arthur's blood ran cold. The VFW hall wasn't just a building. It was a sanctuary. It was a place where veterans found peace and brotherhood. It held their memories, their flags, their history. "That's a sacred place," Thorn growled. He was already moving toward his bike. "Wait," Arthur called out. His voice cut through the chaos. Everyone turned to look at him. "That's what he wants. He wants to draw our forces out, spread us thin. He wants us to react with anger." He turned to the crowd of veterans and townspeople that had gathered. "This isn't about buildings. Razor is trying to break our spirit. He's trying to make us feel helpless again." Tom Mason stepped forward, his face streaked with ash. "So what do we do, Arthur? Just let them burn down our town?" "No," Arthur replied. His voice was filled with a strength that seemed to push back the darkness. "We show them that fire doesn't destroy steel. It forges it. It makes it stronger." He looked at the faces around him. He saw veterans, business owners, and residents who had lived in fear for too long. But in their eyes, he did not see defeat. He saw a new, hard determination. "Razor thinks he can break us by breaking our things," Arthur continued. "But Oakhaven isn't made of wood and brick. It's made of people. And when people stand together, they are stronger than any fire and stronger than any gang." As if to prove his words, more townspeople began to arrive. They brought buckets of water, blankets, and thermoses of coffee. They came to help. The Iron Scorpions had wanted to show their power, but instead, they had revealed the town's true strength. The strength of community. "Sarah," Arthur turned to the young woman. "Contact every business owner in town. Tell them we're calling an emergency meeting tomorrow morning at the community center. It's time Oakhaven showed Razor what real power looks like." Thorn nodded. He understood. "You're thinking about a counteroffensive." "Something like that," Arthur said with a grim smile. "But this time, we're not just fighting for territory. We're fighting for our home." The fires continued to burn through the night, but they lit up more than just destruction. They lit up the faces of neighbors helping neighbors, of veterans standing guard, and of a town that was finally ready to fight back. The Iron Scorpions had meant to break Oakhaven's spirit. Instead, they had united it. As dawn approached, Arthur stood in front of the damaged VFW hall. Volunteers were already starting to clean up the mess. The night's attacks were meant to demoralize them. But looking at the determined faces all around him, Arthur knew that Razor had made a critical mistake. He had shown his whole hand, too early and too aggressively. Now, it was their turn. And Arthur Peterson had learned a thing or two about strategy in his 88 years. The war for Oakhaven was about to enter a new phase. And this time, they would be the ones to set the terms. The community center was overflowing by dawn. Every seat was taken. Business owners, residents, and veterans stood along the walls. The air was thick with the smell of coffee and a quiet, simmering anger. Arthur stood at a simple wooden podium. Behind him, a large map of Oakhaven was covered with red pins, marking the locations of the previous night's attacks. "Last night," Arthur began, his voice calm and steady, "the Iron Scorpions showed us what they believe power is. They believe it's destruction. They believe it's fear." Tom Mason stood up. His face was tired, but his voice was strong. "How do we fight that, Arthur? They have numbers, they have weapons, and they obviously have a source feeding them information." "That is exactly why we are going to win," Arthur replied. A faint smile touched his lips. "Because they think those things make them strong. But I learned something in the jungles of Vietnam that Razor will never understand. True strength isn't about how much you can break. It's about how much you can endure and still stand up. It's about how much you can build." General Thorn stepped forward. He unfolded a set of blueprints. "We've already acquired the deed to the old abandoned textile mill on the edge of town. As of this morning, it is the official headquarters of the Sentinel Guard in Oakhaven." A murmur went through the crowd. The old mill was on a hill. It overlooked most of the town. It was a strategic position. "But that's not all," Arthur continued. "Every business they attacked last night, we are going to rebuild them. Not one by one. All of them. And we're going to do it today. Sarah from the cafe stood up. How? Most of us don't have insurance that will cover this kind of criminal activity. We're ruined. No, you're not. Chief Roberts announced from the back of the room. He had come in uniform, a clear statement of support. The Sentinel Guard has established a community restoration fund. Every one of their members from across the state has contributed. We have more than enough to rebuild every damaged business and to upgrade security. The room erupted with shocked whispers. Thorne raised his hand for silence. That's phase 1, he said. Phase 2 is making sure this never happens again. Arthur pointed to the map. The Iron Scorpions think they control this town through fear. But they have a weakness. They need this town to operate. They need gas for their bikes. They need food from our diners. They need our streets to move around. He turned to the crowd. His eyes were bright with a tactical fire. Starting today, every business in Oakhaven will be a hard target. Sentinel Guard members will train employees in security protocols. We will install surveillance systems, panic buttons, and emergency response plans. We are going to lock this town down. What about their mole? Someone called out. The one in City Hall. Chief Roberts spoke up. Already handled. We fed the mole false patrol routes last night. The information they acted on was exactly the information we wanted them to have. Now we know how they're getting their intel, and that pipeline is officially closed. A spark of hope ignited in the room. Arthur could see it on their faces. The feeling of helplessness was being replaced by resolve. Here is what happens next, Arthur announced. Every business they attacked reopens by sunset. We work together. Veterans, residents, shop owners, everyone. We will show them that they cannot shut us down. They cannot break our spirit. Tom Mason stood again. My store, it's a wreck, Arthur. Sunset is awfully soon. You'll have help, Thorne assured him. Half the Sentinel Guard are skilled tradesmen. The other half, well, we're very good at following orders and carrying heavy things. The meeting instantly transformed into an organized hub of activity. People broke into groups. Assignments were given out. Resources were coordinated. The Sentinel Guard distributed radios and security gear, while a team of their logistics experts handed out detailed plans for the restorations. Arthur watched it all unfold from the podium. He remembered another time, in another place, where he had seen people come together in the face of chaos. Razor had tried to break them. He had only succeeded in making them a single, unified force. Outside, the sounds of hammers and saws had already begun. Sentinel Guard members were tearing down the burned facade of Tom's Hardware, while local contractors, working for free, delivered fresh lumber. The street was filled with people. People carrying tools. People carrying supplies. People carrying hope. You know Razor won't take this lying down, Thorne said quietly, joining Arthur at the podium. I'm counting on it, he replied. But this time, when he strikes, he won't be hitting a single, soft target. He'll be hitting a fortress. He'll be facing a united town. Sarah approached with a radio. We've got Scorpions watching from the hills. They can see everything. Good, Arthur nodded. Let them watch. Let them see what happens when you try to burn down something that refuses to be broken. As the sun climbed higher, Oakhaven was transformed. Veterans worked side by side with civilians. The diner that had been attacked was serving free coffee and sandwiches to the work crews from a makeshift counter. The VFW hall's damaged walls were already being repaired, and a new, taller flagpole was being installed. Arthur stood in the middle of Main Street, watching his plan come to life. The Iron Scorpions had tried to destroy Oakhaven's spirit with fire. Instead, they had ignited it. The war was far from over, but the battlefield had changed, and Razor was about to learn a very hard lesson about what real power truly was. The Shadow Viper warehouse vibrated with a tense, angry energy. From a laptop screen, Razor watched the surveillance footage. He saw the people of Oakhaven, working together, erasing the damage his gang had done. His knuckles were white around the beer bottle in his hand. They rebuilt it all, Snake Tattoo said. He sounded shocked. In one day? It's like we were never even there. Not everything, Razor growled. His eyes were glued to the screen. He saw the new security cameras being installed. He saw Sentinel Guard members training shop owners. What had been a soft, easy town was quickly becoming a fortress. They're organized, Grinder observed quietly. That's not just repair work. That's fortification. Military style. Razor threw his beer bottle against the far wall. It shattered. That old woman. She's not just fighting back. She's changing the whole town. The warehouse door creaked open. A nervous-looking man in a cheap suit hurried in. It was their source from City Hall. "We've got bigger problems," he said, his voice trembling. "The Sentinel Guard just filed paperwork. They have official security contracts with half the businesses in town. They're going legitimate, licensed and bonded. They're taking our business," Snake Tattoo realized. "Legally." Razor's face was dark with fury. "What about the police patrols? The routes I paid you for?" The man shook his head, sweating. "They were fake. Chief Roberts knew there was a leak. He fed me bad information. I can't risk giving you anything else. They know." At that moment, Razor knew he had lost. He had lost his income. He had lost his intelligence. Most importantly, he had lost the fear that gave him power. His pride, however, was not gone. It was wounded, and it was screaming for revenge. He walked over to a locked footlocker and pulled out a satellite phone. This was a number he had been told to use only in the most dire emergency. "Who are you calling?" Grinder asked. "Backup," Razor snarled. "Real professionals." 2 hours later, a new presence arrived in Oak Haven. It was not the loud roar of motorcycles. It was the quiet hum of 3 black, unmarked sedans. They moved through town with an unnerving precision. They parked in strategic locations, and men in dark suits got out. They were not bikers. Their eyes were cold, their movements economical. They were professionals. At the new Sentinel Guard headquarters in the old mill, Arthur watched them on the surveillance feeds. "They're getting desperate," Thorne noted, looking through a pair of binoculars. "He's lost his income, his intel, and his fear factor. A desperate man is a dangerous man." "These aren't just desperate men, Marcus," Arthur replied, his eyes tracing their movements on the screen. He recognized the pattern. "He's brought in mercenaries. Hired guns." Chief Roberts, who was also in the command center, looked grim. "This just escalated. DEA has a file on these guys. They're troubleshooters for a major arms trafficking ring Razor has been supplying. They don't do gang wars. They do clean, quiet eliminations." "This just became about more than our town," Thorne said, his voice low. Arthur moved to the large map of Oak Haven. "They're not setting up for a fight. They're setting up for an assassination. They're establishing sniper nests, planning escape routes. This is military-grade preparation. Then we respond in kind," Thorne declared. "No," Arthur said, shaking his head. "That's what they want. They want an open conflict. It would force state and federal intervention. In the chaos, innocent people would get hurt. We can't let that happen." "So what's the play, Doc?" Roberts asked. The room had gone quiet. Everyone was looking at Arthur. Arthur's finger traced a path on the map. It was the path he walked every morning. From his house, to the cafe, to the park, and back. "They think they have us outgunned. They think they're smarter, more professional. We let them believe that. We let them get overconfident." "What's their real objective?" Thorne asked, though he already knew the answer. "Me," Arthur stated simply. "All of this, the mercenaries, the escalation, it's because Razor's pride is broken. He needs to show everyone he can break me. He needs to make an example of me to save face." The room was silent. "You are not suggesting," Thorne began. "I'm suggesting we give him exactly what he wants," Arthur confirmed. "A clear shot at me. But we will do it on our terms. Not his." "That's insane, Doc," Roberts protested. "These are professional killers." Arthur's smile was faint but firm. "So were the men who hunted us at Firebase Condor. I'm still here." He turned to the others. "Professionals follow patterns. They stick to protocol. We can use that against them." The strategy session lasted until dawn. The plan they created was dangerous, but brilliant. The Sentinel Guard would appear to pull back, reducing their visible patrols. They would make it look like they were intimidated by the new arrivals. Meanwhile, they would strengthen their hidden positions. Every mercenary movement, every communication, would be documented. They would build an evidence file so airtight that it would not only take down the mercenaries and the Scorpions, but the entire arms trafficking network they worked for. As the meeting ended, Thorne pulled Arthur aside. "They will come for you, Document. You know that." "I'm counting on it," Arthur replied. "Sometimes, the only way to disarm a trap is to walk right into it." The first sign that the plan was working came at dawn. The Sentinel Guard patrols, which had become a comforting sight, were gone. Their absence left a nervous quiet over the town. To the mercenaries watching, it looked like a retreat. Arthur left his house at his usual time. He walked alone to the corner Perk Cafe. His steps were calm and unhurried. In the reflection of a shop window, he saw one of the mercenary teams tracking him. They were good, but he had spent years spotting men who were trained to be invisible. "You shouldn't be out here alone, Arthur," Sarah said, her voice a worried whisper as she served him his coffee. "It's exactly where I need to be, Sarah," he replied softly. "Let them watch." In a parked sedan down the street, the mercenary commander, a man known only as Marshall, watched through binoculars. "Target is establishing a predictable pattern," he said into his radio. "He's moving in the open, unprotected. Either he's careless, or it's a trap." "That old man is smarter than he looks," Razor's voice crackled back. "It doesn't matter," Marshall replied coldly. "A predictable target is a dead target. Trap or no trap." At the Sentinel Guard's headquarters, Thorne and Sarah monitored the hidden cameras that covered every inch of the town. 4 sniper teams, Sarah noted, marking their positions on a digital map, plus 3 ground teams disguised as civilians. "They're creating a kill zone, just like Arthur said they would." Thorne nodded. "They're following the textbook. Overlapping fields of fire, clear escape routes. Amateurs." Throughout the morning, Arthur continued his routine. He visited Tom at the hardware store. He walked through the park. He stopped to chat with his neighbors. And all the while, the mercenary teams tracked him, logged his patterns, and finalized their plan. What they didn't notice was the silent communication happening all around them. Every friendly wave from a neighbor was a signal. Every shopkeeper sweeping a sidewalk was an observer. The Sentinel Guard hadn't retreated. They had simply blended into the town. The entire town of Oakhaven had become Arthur's protection detail. "All teams are in position." A voice came over Arthur's hidden earpiece. It was Sarah. "Federal teams are standing by on the outskirts. We've got it all on camera." "Understood." Arthur subvocalized, appearing to read a plaque on the town's founder. "Time to end this." As dusk settled, Marshall's team was ready. To his professional eye, it was a perfect setup. He gave the order. "Green light. We end this after sunset." Arthur sat in his booth at the diner as night fell. He was calmly sipping his coffee. Through the window, he saw Marshall's sedan pull up. The mercenary commander had decided to handle this personally. The bell on the diner door chimed. Marshall entered, flanked by 2 of his men. The other customers, all Sentinel Guard members in civilian clothes, paid them no attention. "Mr. Peterson," Marshall said, sliding into the booth opposite Arthur. "I think it's time we had a talk." Arthur set down his coffee cup. He met the man's cold gaze without flinching. "I was wondering when you'd stop hiding behind your rifle scope." "This is a professional courtesy," Marshall stated. "A chance to end this without any more noise. Walk away now. Leave town, or you won't be walking away at all." Arthur almost smiled. "I've faced better men than you, son. Men who were fighting for something more than a paycheck." For a second, something flickered in Marshall's eyes. Then the professional coldness returned. "You have 1 hour," he said, standing up. "After that, it's just business." As Marshall and his men left, Arthur looked at his watch. Everything was going exactly as planned. The mercenaries were committed. Razor was about to get his wish. And the town of Oakhaven was about to show them what real power looked like. The next hour would change everything. The final minutes of the hour ticked away in a tense silence. From his command vehicle, Marshall watched the timer on his display. "All teams, final check," he ordered. The replies came back, one by one. All teams were in position. The target had not moved from the diner. Marshall frowned. Something felt wrong. It was too easy. Then, before he could give the final order, something happened that was not in his plan. Every light in Oakhaven went out. For a moment, the town was plunged into absolute darkness. Then, powerful spotlights ignited from hidden rooftops. They weren't aimed at the streets. They were aimed directly at the mercenaries' positions. The sniper nests and lookout points were lit up with brilliant, blinding clarity. "We're compromised," a voice screamed over the radio. "Multiple hostiles closing in." Marshall grabbed his night vision goggles. What he saw made his blood run cold. The Sentinel Guard was emerging from doorways, from alleys, from rooftops. They moved with silent, deadly precision. "All teams, fall back," Marshall ordered. But it was too late. The response came back in panicked fragments. "Team 4 is pinned down. We've lost contact with Team 3. In the diner, Arthur stood up calmly. The other customers revealed themselves as Sentinel Guard members, moving to secure the building. Arthur picked up a 2-way radio from under the table. "Marshal," he said, his voice calm and clear. "I believe we need to have another chat about professional courtesy." Outside, the sound of helicopters filled the air. Federal agents were surrounding the arms traffickers' safe houses on the edge of town. Every escape route was cut off. Every contingency had been countered. "You planned this." Marshall's voice came over the radio. There was no anger in it, only the grudging respect of one professional for another. The routine, the predictability, it was all a setup. "Of course it was," Arthur replied. "Did you really think a combat veteran would be that careless? Every move you made was the move we wanted you to make." In the chaos, Marshall's sedan squealed around a corner. It found its path blocked by two large garbage trucks. The trap was perfect. "You have two choices," Arthur's voice continued. "Surrender now and face federal charges. Or try to fight your way out against 100 men who have spent their lives mastering the art of warfare. What's the professional choice, Marshal?" A long silence followed. Then, the resigned voice of a beaten man came over the radio. "Stand down," Marshall ordered his teams. "All units, stand down." One by one, the mercenaries emerged, their hands raised. But it wasn't over. In the middle of the confusion, a single vehicle burst from the Iron Scorpion's warehouse. It was a large panel van, and it was driving erratically, heading for downtown. It was Razor. "Peggy, we've got movement at the warehouse." Sarah's voice cracked over the radio, using a prearranged code name for Arthur. "Thermal shows he's got, oh my God, he's got explosives. Military grade." This was no longer about pride. This was a madman's final, destructive act. "He's heading for the town square," Thorne reported. "He won't get that far," Arthur said. He was already out the back door of the diner and in his old Chevrolet. The chase was not about speed. It was about knowledge. Razor roared through the main streets, but Arthur cut through the alleys and side roads he had known for 50 years. He knew where Razor was going. He knew how to get there first. He intercepted the van at the entrance to the construction site for the new community center. It was a dead end. The van screeched to a halt, trapped by concrete barriers. The Sentinel Guard and police were seconds behind. Razor leaped from the van. In his hand was a detonator. "Back off," he screamed, his face wild with hate. "One push and we all go up." Arthur got out of his car. He walked slowly toward the van. He was unarmed. "Is this what you wanted, son?" Arthur called out. "To burn it all down because you couldn't own it?" "Shut up," Razor shrieked. His hand trembled on the detonator. "You did this. You turned them all against me." "No," Arthur said, taking another step. "You did this to yourself. Every time you chose cruelty over kindness. Every time you chose fear over respect." The few remaining bikers with Razor looked at their leader. They had signed up for a turf war, not a suicide bombing. "One more step, old man, and I'll do it." Arthur kept walking. His eyes never left Razor's. "No, you won't. Because deep down, you're just a scared boy who never learned the difference between being feared and being respected. Real strength isn't about how many people you can hurt. It's about how many you can help." For a heartbeat, something in Razor's eyes flickered. Doubt, fear, regret. Then his finger tightened on the button. But before he could press it, a single gunshot rang out. Not from the police. Not from the Sentinel Guard. Grinder, Razor's oldest friend, stood with a pistol in his hand. The bullet had hit Razor's arm, sending the detonator flying harmlessly to the ground. The standoff ended not with a bang, but with the quiet click of handcuffs. 1 year later, Oakhaven was a different town. The morning sun rose on a community that had not just healed, but had grown stronger. Arthur Peterson, now 89, sat in his usual booth at the corner perk. The old mill, once the Sentinel Guard's headquarters, was now a thriving community and vocational center. It offered job training and counseling. Its most successful program was for at-risk young men, many of them former Iron Scorpions. "Morning, Mr. Peterson," a familiar voice said. It was the young man who once had a snake tattoo on his neck. Now he was the manager of the center's workshop. He went by his real name, James. "How's the program going, James?" Arthur asked. "Got 3 more guys starting next week," he said with a proud smile. "Word is spreading. Other towns want to know how Oakhaven did it." General Thorne entered and took his usual seat across from Arthur. "Just got a letter from Marshall," he reported. "He's getting an early release for his cooperation. Still wants a job when he gets out." Arthur nodded. "We can always use men who have learned from their mistakes." Outside, a group of motorcycles rolled past. It was a mix of Sentinel Guard and former Scorpions. Their bikes were no longer symbols of fear. They were symbols of a new kind of brotherhood. They were heading out to help a neighboring town clean up after a storm. Remember when this all started? Thorne asked, watching them go. One phone call. One phone call, Arthur agreed. But it was never really about the phone call. It was about showing people a different way, a better way to be strong. The memorial in the town square didn't celebrate a victory in a war. It was a simple granite stone that read, "Strength is not in the fist, but in the open hand." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Arthur sat on his porch. The distant sound of motorcycles was no longer a threat. It was the sound of his town, a town that had faced its own darkness and had chosen the light, a town that had learned the greatest victory is not in defeating an enemy, but in helping him find a better path. And it all started because one old soldier refused to be afraid. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive stories.